How's everybody doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Maye. Today is Friday, August 23rd, here on today's show to end your week with some more NFL talk to round out this week. A bunch of interesting topics to get to on today's show. We're going to go over the Jahan Dotson trade to the Philadelphia Eagles and how that impacts the Eagles, winners and losers from both sides of the trade. And also talking about some contract extensions here. One to the Falcons defensive back, Terrell, getting a lot of money right there, pushing the market value alongside Jair Alexander. And also Creed Humphrey getting an extension from the Kansas City Chiefs and him becoming the highest paid center in NFL history, plus a couple more topics down the line as well. We're going to dive right in, but before we do that, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys ever have any questions or comments or any opinions you'd like to share, the topics on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast are going to get a little bit more involved now that the season is getting closer and closer to starting. So with that in mind, if you have anything you'd like to share, please remember to use this new feature, the Super Chat feature that we have now available to you guys on any of our live shows whenever you have something to say. If you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and we feature it on our shows, use that Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate every bit of it whenever you guys are able to do that. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as exciting and as interactive as possible. But there's also still that alternative option. If you do prefer that, you can still use the tip and donations option, GSMCPodcast.net. By clicking on that link, you're able to still tip and donate and leave your comment or question there as well. Again, we couldn't do this show without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. But now with that out of the way, we can start on a pretty significant trade that I thought of once I heard the news. Pretty random, just dropping out of nowhere yesterday, the news that the Washington Commanders had agreed on a trade to send Jahan Dotson and a 5th-round pick to the Philadelphia Eagles for a 3rd-round pick and 2 7th-round picks as well. Not only was it just random in terms of just popping up out of nowhere, but also the fact that it was within the division, and you don't get this too often. Honestly, you've seen it a lot in the NFC East just in this offseason with a couple of trades now with this one, and I think there was one between the Cowboys and the Giants not too long ago. So not too of a common thing to happen within a division, especially so close to the season. We're not talking about superstar players, but even still, it doesn't seem very likely that division rivals like to trade anyway, because of the fact that you could be giving the advantage, obviously, to a direct rival. But nonetheless, it almost seemed like this had been brewing a little bit with Jahan Dotson, just because there was this sort of open competition, you could say, for that wide receiver 2 spot behind Terry McLaurin. At least that's how head coach Dan Quinn put it. You know, he brought it up and going through the process of trying to find a reliable number 2 weapon behind Terry. And, you know, he mentioned that Jahan Dotson was being considered for the spot, but the thing that he, not emphasized, but the thing that stood out from his statement was that he wasn't standing out. Out of all the players in mind, Jahan Dotson wasn't really standing out, and that was just a little bit of a concern, just because you're talking about a former first-round pick just 2 seasons ago, and, you know, there's still a lot of time left, obviously. I don't like to put big labels on young players so early on, especially with the situation in Washington. You think about the lack of quarterback play. It's obviously the biggest thing, you know, cycling through different guys, different offensive systems and things like that, and just plainly not having the support around the wide receiver position as well. But still, in those 2 seasons that you look at Jahan Dotson and how it's, you know, played out for him, over the 2 years, he's only been able to record 1,040 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 84 receptions in his time as a Washington Commander. And, you know, when you're competing, especially against guys like Olamide Zaccheaus, De'Ami Brown, and especially a rookie, Luke McCaffrey, and still your head coach is implying that you're not standing out too much, again, a former first-round pick out of Penn State, it raised a few antennas in the media a couple of days ago when Dan Quinn said that. But now, obviously, it has all come into fruition, and Jahan Dotson doesn't have to go too far. A familiar spot, not only because he played in Penn State, obviously, but familiar in terms of reuniting with a guy that also went to Penn State in Saquon Barkley there with the Eagles. And it's a good move, I think, overall for the Philadelphia Eagles and just how it has all played out. In reality, I'll get to my one thing that I'm looking forward to in terms of the Commanders later on in this segment, but for the Eagles, just to continue on, they finally seem to have found a wide receiver to complete their trio that they've tried to put together this offseason, but just trying to find that one missing piece to it, with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown obviously leading the charge. It always helps to have one more guy there that at least is a reliable option to contribute in any way possible, and that he would just come in there, accept his role, knowing that, he is playing with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. So maybe not getting a lot of targets, but they're all right with that. And I think Jahan Dotson fits the bill here pretty perfectly, just because you look at what he's already been doing, like I mentioned in his 2 seasons with Washington, averaging about 500 or so yards each year. You'd think he'd get better. You hope that he gets better, obviously only being in his 3rd year, heading into his 3rd year in the NFL, and playing with a lot better, support system around him, a lot better teammates. And no shade to Jahan Dotson, but I think opposing defenses clearly think of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon, Jalen Hurts, Dallas Goedert maybe even, before they start thinking about Jahan Dotson as things that they have to get under wraps before, the ball is snapped. So with that in mind, with all eyes really not being on him as much as they were in Washington, even if he performs as well as he has been with the Commanders, and that clearly wasn't good enough for them, if he does that for the Philadelphia Eagles, it's still going to be an improvement. And why do I say that? Well, you look at the stats just from last year with Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, both having the typical seasons that you would expect out of clearly 2 number 1 wide receivers. They both recorded 7 touchdowns each, over 1,000 yards for the both of them, 81 plus receptions each for Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And then you look at, what everybody else did. Those numbers are awesome. They're fantastic. A big reason why the Eagles, had the record. I think it was 12-1 at one point or something like that, or 10-1 last year in 2023. But you look at the support system after that, and you look at the next best receiving option after those 2, and that was Dallas Goedert. And then, no problem with that. You have a great tight end. If he's the 3rd option, that's fine. But then when you look after the top 3, it gets a little bit odd, just because after Dallas Goedert, then it was DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell, the next 2 best receiving options, or the 2 best receiving stat lines after your tight end. And that's weird because those are 2 running backs. You don't get to a wide receiver in the stat line until you reach Olamide Zaccheaus, which is ironic because he's now probably the 2nd best receiver on the Commanders. And he finished last year with only 10 receptions, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns on only 20 targets. And obviously you're not going to get probably close to the amount of targets that Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown gets, but their next best receiver in terms of contributing to the overall offense had just barely 200 yards. He had 164 yards, and again, he wasn't targeted enough, but I think it says a lot just where the options were for the Philadelphia Eagles. Maybe they weren't confident enough in Zaccheaus, or maybe that's just how their offense runs. But now you bring in Kellen Moore, you bring in Jahan Dotson now, and again, if he plays to the level that he has been playing at with the Commanders, 500 yards, it's going to feel like a completely different feel or contribution than what you got last year from your next best receiver after Smitty and A.J. Brown. 400 more yards on top of what you got from Zaccheaus last year. It's going to make a difference. I'm telling you guys that right now. And for right now, even if Dotson plays at that same level, it's going to be an improvement. And some people might think that it might be overhyping Jahan Dotson in this sense, thinking that, he's not going to add this much to an already stacked Eagles team. I can see that, and I'm almost sharing that same thought here because, again, they were 10-1 or something like that last year with the team that they had, so they were already going to get better with Saquon, and I think more so with the coordinators that they brought in, but adding Jahan Dotson still is going to make a difference. I think he's going to contribute a lot to this offense, and I think Kellen Moore wouldn't be too oblivious to the fact that bringing in a guy like this is going to benefit you one way or another because so much attention goes to all their superstars. And yes, they're going to require their target share, but Jahan is going to be in a lot of favorable situations. So to not use him would be a waste. And also, in terms of just the winners and losers in this, clearly the Eagles won this just because I'm believing that you acquired, you're only a third wide receiver. It's not like you're going out there and trying to get a number 2 or a number 1. You paid pretty low to go and get Jahan Dotson. So even if it doesn't work out, it almost doesn't affect how this offense is going to run too much. And then for Washington, it's a little bit disappointing because he was a first-round pick. He was only traded after 2 seasons, and he failed to produce, albeit with a bad offense. You kind of hope that he would have stuck around a little bit longer, but they were really clearing everything out, and they got some more draft capital for Jahan Dotson. So, clearly, I think it was a pretty clear winner and loser there. But the last thing I will mention, at least on a positive note to end it here for the Washington Commanders, it doesn't close the door now. It honestly opens the door a little bit more to going out there and thinking that Brandon Ayuk could be an option here. They've been pretty much out of it for the last 3 weeks now. The situation hasn't moved in the last 3 weeks, but it usually just was reserved for the Steelers or the 49ers for Ayuk. And now, I've been saying it for a while, if you guys have been watching, the Commanders make too much sense to not be at least involved now. And I saw a report today that, they're now trying to get more involved in seeing what the possibility could be to even trade for Brandon Ayuk. But what they can't do is think about moving Terry McLaurin. Obviously, that does nothing for improving you. But if they don't have to trade Terry and they could, entice the 49ers to favor them over the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think it makes too much sense. And especially for this wide receiver room that now has Zaccheaus, Daimi Brown, and Luke McCaffrey. With Terry McLaurin, it's not going to be enough to support Jaden Daniels. He's going to look fantastic if the Commanders still have a decent record with that wide receiver room, but you can't rely just on Jaden Daniels, a rookie quarterback, to bail you out just in his first season. You need to do whatever you can to improve that wide receiver room, and if they can get Brandon Ayuk, I think it's, perfect for them, the perfect situation to go and do that. But hopefully they try to figure that out, but Jahan Dotson confirmed is going to be a Philadelphia Eagle this coming season, and we'll see how exactly he fits in there to their offense with the new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore. But we have a few more things to talk about on today's show. We're going to transition from that to talking to a few of these contract extensions that we saw just breaking over the last few days. AJ Terrell will be next up. We're going to be talking about Terrell, the Falcons, and agreeing to a 4-year contract extension with their defensive back. And also, after that, we're going to talk about Creed Humphrey as well, become the highest paid center in the NFL. So stay tuned. 2 more topics coming up on today's show. We'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get into some contract talks over the next couple of segments. The first one we're going to dive head first into is AJ Terrell extending his contract with the Atlanta Falcons, a pretty massive contract. On top of that, yesterday morning the news broke that the Falcons and their defensive back AJ Terrell agreed to a 4-year, $81 million contract extension with $65.8 million guaranteed. That amount is the most given to a defensive back in NFL history who has signed a 4-year deal. Not a 5-year deal, not a 3-year extension. Anyone that's ever gotten a 4-year contract extension, being a defensive back, they're all behind AJ Terrell now in terms of getting guaranteed money. 65.8 is a very, very good amount for AJ Terrell. Good for him. But also just in terms of salary and how he lines up with some of the better defensive backs in the NFL. He's set to make about $20.25 million in salary, which is now second amongst all defensive backs currently in the NFL. Still, Jair Alexander is first in that department, and I have to mention, his agents. I can't not mention AJ Terrell's agent because it is, in fact, David Malugeta and also Trayvon Smith of Athletes First. But David Malugeta, I think, considered one of the best, if not the best, agent in football. And I have to mention him because every time it seems like there is a market-setting or close to a market-setting deal, it always seems to be the Malugeta clients that end up getting these deals. And now I'm just going to have to continually check who it is because this guy's always behind agreeing and coming to terms with the best deals for his clients. And he's done it for, obviously, AJ Terrell. Jordan Love is another one of his clients, and I know I'm missing a lot, but he's been very good to a lot of his clients, and it's no surprise here that AJ Terrell is one of the highest paid defensive backs already now with his first contract extension because in part to David Malugeta and also Trayvon Smith as well. But on top of that, this year, 2024, with how it was all breaking down and the landscape for this situation for the Atlanta Falcons, it was set to be AJ Terrell's 5th year, his 5th-year option year. So he was set to make a base salary of about $12.3 million. And he is still going to make that because the Falcons already exercised that and they entered this year, with the plan to do that. And so he's going to earn that much this year before the extension years kick in and before the salary obviously kicks in as well for that new extension. So once this year is over, 2025 and moving forward will be those extension years, which means AJ Terrell is going to be signed with the Falcons until or through the 2028 year, which is great for them to build out this core group of players that they really want to take into this new era, hopefully a long one with their new head coach Raheem Morris, and locking down a guy like AJ Terrell along with more of their core players like Jesse Bates, Bijan Robinson's obviously on his rookie deal, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. These guys, while their extension may be coming up in less time, you lock down one of your premier defenders, at least on that side of the ball. And knowing Raheem Morris, obviously being a defensive guy, he obviously isn't naive to the fact that you need a lockdown corner if you're going to have any chance of succeeding in the NFL. And also, their division is full of them. Mike Evans is there as well, Chris Godwin. You look at them, Chris Olave as well with the New Orleans Saints. There is some threats there in terms of receivers, so having a guy like this is a tremendous help. Not only AJ Terrell, but also this sort of culminates a pretty busy last couple of weeks for the Atlanta Falcons to make sure they lock down a lot of their big defensive pieces, obviously with AJ Terrell, but in terms of revolutionizing the look of this defense, I had a lot of concerns going in because of their pass rush and the amount of pressure they were able to generate on a game-to-game basis. That has been something they've been struggling with, but they go out, they trade for Matthew Judon. That addresses that. And also, to make matters even better for themselves and in their secondary, they go out and sign Justin Simmons to a 1-year deal to go along with Jesse Bates back there. Now you lock down AJ Terrell. A whole new look and a whole new feeling heading into 2024 with this Atlanta Falcons defense, and it's exciting. It's exciting just because these are all good, proven players that you have, at least in AJ Terrell, Jesse Bates, Justin Simmons as well, with their resume, Matthew Judon coming in as well with the resume they're able to present, and also AJ Terrell, still being very young. I think he's only 25, 24 years old. He's really heading into the premier years of his career, and so far, since being drafted in 2020, he has started all 61 games he has been able to play in, 4 interceptions, 247 tackles, and 4 forced fumbles to his name with the Atlanta Falcons, and he made the All-Pro list in 2021. He hasn't been back there yet, but the reality and the reliability you get with AJ Terrell, really the health is the biggest thing that stands out to me. The 61 games played, he has started in every game he's been able to play, is huge. It's not a common thing to have a guy like that knowing that you're going to have him out there each and every week, especially obviously in a game like football. Just generally, injuries are going to happen, and for him to be always available, it seems like you can't just buy that, and it's hard to put a price on that as well. So keeping him around for the foreseeable future was a must-have for this Falcons team, and now you look at them with the addition of all those defensive players on that side of the ball, and I don't know what the odds were before, but DraftKings currently has the Falcons as the favorites for that division at minus 130 at the time that I made, this segment plan. So they were at minus 130 at that time, and the Bucks were at plus 320. So it seems like Atlanta has gotten a lot of people's attention, maybe over the last few days or just from the beginning. Again, I don't know what the odds were before, but checking in after, this move was made, signing AJ Terrell, pretty favorable odds for the Falcons, and it's pretty notable just because you look at the Bucks and the season that they had last year, being able to win that division and having a pretty decent run at it in the playoffs as well, beating the Philadelphia Eagles at home and then being close with the Detroit Lions as well on the road. You'd think they'd come in here, they were able to re-sign a lot of their big-name players like Baker, Mike Evans, and Antoine Winfield, that when I was looking around, the internet for these odds, I thought it'd be a little bit closer, but clearly everyone is buying into the Atlanta Falcons. I think it was brought to my attention today, but I think I saw it just on my own. I think a day or two ago that I think it was Dan Orlovsky said that the Falcons are Super Bowl contenders. I wouldn't go that far, but they are definitely a bigger threat now than they obviously were. I just like to see it all play out. There's a lot of pressure, I would say, riding on the fact that Kirk Cousins is coming in, and right away people are thinking that he is going to just transform this team into a whole new look offense where they were talented before, they were putting up results before, and obviously the biggest issue with their offense was the quarterback position, and I'm not saying they're not going to get better or it's going to be even close to what it was with Desmond Ridder, but I just want to see how he looks out there. I want to see how he's moving with that reconstructed Achilles at his age, not playing the preseason at all, having a real live pass rush where it's not training camp, it's not these joint practices where you get to the quarterback and you just put a hand on him, even if they even allow you to do that, and then that's it. He's going to be taking actual hits after a year or so, maybe over a year or so since last taking one, and I'd just like to see how he responds to that, how he responds physically to that, and not to say that I think it's just going to derail everything, but before I crown them Super Bowl contenders, especially in an NFC where, you still have obviously the Eagles and the 49ers as the biggest favorites. The Packers shouldn't be slept on. The Lions obviously were in the conference championship, and the Bears got better. The Vikings got better, in my opinion. The Commanders aren't Super Bowl contenders, but they got better on top of it. And obviously you still have the Buccaneers there in your division. So I want to see how it all plays out. Anything could really happen in the NFC. It's all been pretty unexpected how it all plays out. So I'd like to see before I really buy in a lot with this Falcons team. But, it's no surprise that right away people are buying into it. But what else, something else that brings into my mind, that this situation brings into my mind, is that with the division being how it is, definitely not one of the toughest ones in the NFL, but I look at those two games now that the Bucs and the Falcons are scheduled to play with each other, and because it seems like the Bucs and the Falcons are up here and then the Saints and the Panthers are down here, it just makes me think of how much more of an emphasis it'll be for when those games come around, when they play in Tampa Bay, when they play in Atlanta, how important those two games are going to be, because I wouldn't think it's crazy to say that they're going to potentially sweep the other two teams just because they're just not there yet in terms of talent and how, they're structuring everything in their organization. It seems like the Bucs and Falcons have started to figure it out a little bit more. They have had more success over the last few years. So when those two games come around, it's going to be must-see just because the whole division could be riding on those games. If they sweep the other two teams, and I know that division hardly ever has one of the toughest schedules in the NFL just because they're playing each other, they're going to have a favorable schedule. So I believe they're going to have favorable records when they do play each other. So those two divisional games are going to be important, and there's going to be more attention to that. And I just like to see how each of these teams responds to that. Maybe depending on how the schedule plays out, I don't have it in front of me, but if it's a late divisional game, Bucs, Falcons, and they have virtually around the same record, a lot could be riding on that. And the Falcons, as a younger team, how do they handle that pressure, being close to making the playoffs? Same thing for the Bucs, trying to win back-to-back divisions, being in that situation. Are they favored in those situations? Do they feel more comfortable? I'm very interested to see that, and it'll say a lot about the Falcons, especially if they do get to that point. By only getting to that point and being close to winning that division says a lot just based on the results they've had over the last few years. And if they are successful in those games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, then I'll really start turning my head and seeing and considering the Falcons as a very, very good team. But for right now, not Super Bowl contenders, but they're right there. They're really pushing. They're banging on the door to really considering themselves one of the better teams. But overall, with this extension, it only helps push that agenda even more, and it should be exciting. That's one thing it'll be, certainly for the Falcons. It seems like they're getting everything right this offseason, and it's only going to kick off in just less than 3 weeks now. So we have that to look forward to in the next couple of weeks. But in terms of this episode, we're going to head into another break. But when we return, some more contract talks, this time a market-setting contract extension giving to Creed Humphrey. The Chiefs extend their center through 2028, and they make him the richest center in NFL history. So stay tuned and find out how much he got and how that impacts their team going forward. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to get more into these contract talks. Now, switching over to the offensive side of the ball and talking about the reigning Super Bowl champions, the Kansas City Chiefs, and getting a big piece of business done. Last night, it was announced that the Chiefs and their center, Creed Humphrey, had agreed to terms on a new 4-year, $72 million extension with $50 million guaranteed, going to the former second-round pick out of Oklahoma back in 2021. Creed Humphrey gets this massive extension, great for him, but also even better for the Kansas City Chiefs, just because this isn't a first-round pick, obviously, second round out of Oklahoma, and that means he doesn't have that fifth-year option available to him for the Chiefs to extend these contract talks a little bit further down the line. So this was the year that they had to, get everything together. They had already extended their kicker, Harrison Butker, and they still have a couple more extensions to get through. But this one stood out to me the most just because of that obvious center to quarterback, connection, the relationship that Creed has with Patrick Mahomes. So this one was a must-have for the Kansas City Chiefs, and they were able to get it done. But not only that, they were able to make Creed Humphrey the highest-paid center in NFL history because that new salary, if we do a little bit of math, $72 million by 4 years, about $18 million per year, and that clearly is above the old market value set by the Detroit Lions center, Frank Ragnow, at $13.5 million with $42 million guaranteed that he previously got. Now, Creed Humphrey is clearly above that, and not only of that relationship with Patrick Mahomes, that Creed Humphrey definitely deserved this opportunity to get paid accordingly, but also he has earned it, honestly, because he hasn't been in the NFL for too long. In 3 years only in the NFL, he became an immediate starter. He has never missed a start. Every single game of his NFL career that he has had available to him, he's been able to start 51 games exactly. To his resume, he already has 2 Super Bowls, 2 Pro Bowls, a second-team All-Pro back in 2022, and having that all just at the start of your career, he's only going to get better, obviously, with not only how good he is coming out of Oklahoma in the second round. On top of that, yeah, you don't have that fifth-year option available to you, but in the same breath, you get him at that value in the second round, and it made for a great 2021 draft for the Chiefs, honestly, because not only were they able to get Creed Humphrey in the second round, they were able to also draft their starting linebacker, still Nick Bolton, and also in the 6th round of that draft, they were able to select Trey Smith, who is the right guard, if I'm not mistaken, for them still currently right now. And I bring those two guys up especially in that draft because not only did they get great value for them, and the return that they got for them on the field is fantastic, but they are also due for some contract extensions. Same thing that they were facing with Creed Humphrey. No fifth-year options, obviously, for them, so they are entering the last year of their rookie deals, and those are the two biggest things that the Chiefs need to get done in the meantime now. But getting Creed Humphrey down for the foreseeable future, signed through 2028, is huge because it makes the interior part of this offensive line stay together for the foreseeable future. You lock down Creed Humphrey, you have Joe Thuney there as well, and Trey Smith is the final piece of that puzzle. So getting him extended is going to complete everything, and it says a lot. Not only that they're able to keep the interior part of this offensive line together, but they've been able to cycle through a couple of tackles in the Patrick Mahomes era, and they've been pretty successful, right, if I were to say. So that's been great for them, keeping a lot of their core players together, and not only were they able to, lock down Patrick Mahomes to that ridiculous 10-year contract or something like that, but they've been able to restructure it a couple times, and it has opened up these opportunities for these other players to get extended that are massive pieces to what the Chiefs are trying to do now, on the brink of making history, on the verge of three-peating, going back to back to back as Super Bowl champions. But now shifting over to the other players that I mentioned before that also have to get extended. Trey Smith, the right guard for the Chiefs, and also Nick Bolton, because Creed Humphrey, fantastic. If I were to order it, Creed would have been first to get extended, but now these two are almost as important as Creed Humphrey just because they are entering the last year of their deals, like I said before. And it is funny how it works, having the right guard and the linebacker as your two major extension that you have to get done, just because the salary that has been set for them in terms of the market value is about the same, with $20 million set for both of their markets. I know it's Roquan Smith who makes the most for the inside linebacking position, but also I want to say it's Chris Lindstrom, who makes the most for the right guards, and they're both about $20.5 million in salary, and they're the highest earning at their position. So when you talk about Nick Bolton and Trey Smith in each of those markets, I think they can make a push for, getting as close to that market value in terms of, guarantees and things like that. But if I would expect Trey Smith not only to be next, but to potentially make a little bit more than Nick Bolton would, just because in terms of how it's all set out, you have Roquan, and I think you have Fred Warner and Tremaine Edmonds as the highest 3 earning linebackers, and they're all making, like I said, 20, 19, and $18 million per year. I don't think the Chiefs are quite there yet with Nick Bolton to want to extend them to that much. And Trey Smith is also another one. I think he could push for 20 to $18 million per year, but in reality, I wouldn't be surprised if both of them agree to anywhere in the range of $15 to $18 million in salary, just because, of course, every player wants to get paid, every player wants to get, validated for the work that they put in, and get compensated is the better word to use for what they've been able to do and contribute to this Super Bowl winning team, this dynasty pretty much for the Kansas City Chiefs. But there's also the leverage that the Chiefs have, obviously not only having a lot of success as a team, but when you have Patrick Mahomes and you know what he brings and you know that you always have a chance with him as your quarterback, a lot of players that are lucky enough to be in those positions to have won multiple Super Bowls are not just going to bat an eye and turn their head away from that opportunity to keep winning, especially when you have the best player in football on your team. So that oftentimes works into their advantage when it comes to these contract negotiations. So I wouldn't be surprised that both of them sign, maybe a little bit cheaper than we expect, but I wouldn't put it in any category where I'd be worried about these guys getting extended. I feel like it is only a matter of time. They still have a good amount of time also before the start of the regular season. I'm sure Trey Smith and Nick Bolton would want to get it done before then, but locking it down, it always brings up also this other topic of not only Creed Humphrey getting this massive extension, but he joins a good amount of offensive linemen just this year who have gotten also massive extensions themselves. You think of Christian Darrisaw, he is getting paid top of the market money in terms of tackles. Same thing with Tristan Wirfs and Quinn Miners as well for the Denver Broncos, and even Penei Sewell at the start of the offseason. He got extended along with Amon-Ra St. Brown. Penei Sewell was the highest earning tackle in NFL history just before Tristan Wirfs jumped him in the last month or so when he got his new extension. So, Creed, that makes it five offensive linemen that have gotten contract extensions, and pretty decent ones that have reset the market with each of their deals. So it says a lot, I think, not only that there's been 5 of them, obviously, but the value that the offensive lineman still has in the NFL, right? They might not be the flashiest. A lot of times, fans and teams might not know their names and how much they actually contribute to the success of these teams, but centers, offensive tackles, and even guards in there as well, they play a major part in not only winning, but the identity that these teams want to establish with their organizations. And, Tristan Wirfs, he's won a Super Bowl already. Christian Darrisaw and the Vikings are trying to get there, trying to improve their offensive line. Creed Humphrey, again, multi-time Super Bowl winner. Penei Sewell, conference championship. Quinn Miners, maybe not as successful as those other guys, but he definitely is one of the better players on the Denver Broncos. So, the offensive linemen still hold value. We spend a lot of time talking about the wide receivers, the running backs, and how much they're making. We just finished talking about a defensive back and everything like that. So it is important to still highlight the offensive linemen. They do a lot, and a lot of the time their work goes unnoticed. I always say the same thing with offensive linemen. When they're doing a fantastic job, when they're doing everything they're expected to do, you hardly ever hear about them. You might not even know their name. You might not even know where they play on the offensive line. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing because they're not allowing these pass rushers to get in the quarterback's face and getting him injured or anything like that. But when they aren't doing a good job, it stands out like a sore thumb, obviously, because they're always giving up pressures and sacks, and it seems like the quarterback has no time to throw. Don't take it for granted when you have one of these guys and a bunch of other offensive linemen out there that are considered among the best in the NFL. And continuing on with the offensive linemen, you look at a guy like Trent Williams and everything he's been able to do for the 49ers. He's trying to get in on this action as well. Highly considered the best tackle and just overall offensive lineman in the NFL. So it's no surprise that he is holding out, and seeing all these guys get paid, I'm sure he definitely thinks he should be making at least the same or even more than all these guys. And I don't think a lot of people would disagree with him. So that's another situation to keep in mind. And we could have up to 6 offensive linemen get new deals just this offseason, as I do expect the 49ers to get it done with Trent Williams. But for right now, congratulations to Creed Humphrey. The Chiefs were able to draft a great player, but also keep him on their roster for the foreseeable future. And with that being said, we're going to move on to another break here on the show. When we return, 2 new topics to get to just before we close out this show. We're going to be talking about the Patriots quarterback situation again. This time, not Gerard Mayo talking about it, but their offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, and his thoughts on who should be starting and how he's approaching this quarterback battle. And lastly, in the last segment, we're going to be mentioning more on Jahan Dotson, but I'll be giving my rankings on the best NFL wide receiver trios that we currently have after Jahan Dotson forms another one with the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll give you 4 more, and I'll rank them in that last segment. So don't go anywhere. A lot more coming up on today's show. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We are back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to hopefully approach this last situation for, like I said, one of the last times, because we are going to bring up the quarterback situation between Jacoby Brissett and Drake Maye and how it's going to pan out. Hopefully after this weekend, we have a better answer on who the starting quarterback is going to be. Obviously, Jacoby being more of the experienced player, but also Drake Maye impressing a lot of people, not only in his one real preseason game that he got, but also in practice. There's been a lot of chatter on how impressive Drake Maye has been looking, and now this week is going to be pivotal just because we saw the comments over the last few days from Gerard Mayo specifically after the game, and also just heading into this week, how the quarterback competition is very much still open, how both of these guys still have a good shot and a great chance of being that starting quarterback in week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals. And Gerard Mayo actually described this week as being a sort of hybrid week, and by that he means, treating it as it is the preparation and practice schedule leading up to an actual NFL game. So all throughout this week, it has been NFL regular season-like schedule in terms of practices, and I'm assuming what they do at those practices, but it does line up because their game is going to be on Sunday against the Washington Commanders, and the Commanders are probably not going to play any of their starters, but this is going to be huge just because usually that last game, like I just alluded to, most teams decide to just rest their starters, but I'm assuming the Patriots are going to have Jacoby out there, Drake Maye out there, just to get the last looks and see who really deserves to be that starting quarterback. And I mentioned practice before, and I think it has a lot to say just leading into these comments that I will get to with the Patriots offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, because according to a bunch of practice reports and a lot of, insiders that were there present at the Patriots practices, it's been very good for Drake Maye. Not only did they report on the fact that he has been taking more reps with the starting offensive line for the first time in practice, That hasn't ever happened before up until this week. He usually does it maybe during the actual game warm-ups or something like that, but never in practices. He never takes snaps directly from Andrews, their center, so that's a pretty decent development in this. Take it as you will, but also just in terms of what we see on the practice field, Drake Maye continues to impress a lot of people. On Wednesday, he went 6 for 8, completed his first 6 passes, while the other 2 were just drops by a couple receivers, and that's great. It's looking very efficient, very just well put together for Drake Maye, but also when you look at it in comparison to Jacoby Brissett, he went 3 for 6, and also his first completion, or his first throw, was an interception, not a completion, and his last throw was almost another interception. So you already have a lot of eyeballs on this situation, right, from the preseason games, but now people are starting to follow it closer in practice, and you see it. You look at 6 for 8 for a pretty efficient drive, and then you look at 3 for 6 from Jacoby Brissett, and yet obviously one looks better than the other one, obviously, but it doesn't seem to impact their offensive coordinator, Alex Van Pelt, too much, just because for right now, he explained to media members over the course of this week that Jacoby right now is the starter for them, and he mentioned that when he was asked a question as to why Drake Maye hasn't seen more first-team reps with the starting offense, and he said just because Jacoby is the starting quarterback, that's why. And he also said that the quarterback competition is pretty much still open, echoing those sentiments from Jerod Mayo. But what he said next, I think, kind of shines some more light on not only his mindset, but what I've also been thinking about in regards to the quarterback competition, because he kept it pretty honest, I think, in this next statement when he said, I'm sure there's a chance that Drake Maye could become the starter in week 1, but I think as you go in, there's still a process of how you bring a rookie quarterback along, so I think that's important to remember as well. There's certain things in this offense that Jacoby, having played in this offense, stands or understands some of the tools you can use to get out of certain situations, pressure situations, things like that Drake is still learning. And that says a lot to me, just because that's pretty much what I've been trying to say when I've talked about this situation and how and who should start for the Patriots come week 1. And Alex Van Pelt just also added on after that people like to bring up the interceptions as an issue for Jacoby, right? Because you see him throw an interception in practice or something like that. He also threw one in the second preseason game against the Philadelphia Eagles, but their offensive coordinator, obviously, he's not putting a lot of thought into that, is the best way of putting it, just because he explained it a little bit more to the media, just because he brought up the interception, obviously, but he also mentioned that a play or two before that, they could have easily scored on a play that the receiver ran the wrong route. So obviously that didn't happen. That's great in hindsight, right? But, it turned out like it did. Jacoby threw an interception a play or two after that, and that obviously gets most of the headlines. But Alex Van Pelt, following it a little bit closer than most, is not too worried right now about the interceptions or the poor play that Jacoby might be showing from an outsider's perspective in terms of who is gaining the edge over the other in this quarterback battle. And again, it kind of points to the fact that yesterday I mentioned Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, how they're looking in preseason. The results and the overall look of it might not matter too much right now, but there are certain things like the effort, just the decision making you have as a quarterback, especially in that position. Those sort of things matter most, and if you see some faults, some mishaps in those areas, yes, it's something to point out and something to affect any sort of decision that you want to take in a quarterback battle or deciding who makes the roster or not. But when you're talking about results, wins, losses, stats in the preseason, it doesn't really matter too much. And again, Alex Van Pelt is sort of showing that here when he is trying to evaluate both Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett. But the biggest thing he emphasized, obviously, from this statement and just going on later with his statement is that Jacoby just has more of that experience in that offense. That's something that I picked out right away with this statement. And also, going back to their Cleveland days, obviously, that experience that both of those guys had there, the success that they had there as well, but also the NFL experience. I don't think Alex Van Pelt is taking that for granted as well, with reading opposing defenses, knowing how to decipher disguises, certain blitz packages and things like that, how to audible out of it. This week, it's been heavily based on quarterbacks, and not only did we talk about this situation prior to this episode, but also how Tom Brady and Bill Parcells, in that one segment I did as well this week, that they're also putting an emphasis on the mental side of these quarterbacks. How much do they really know from a processing point of view, and how much do they really have command of their offenses at such an early age where, yeah, they might perform like Drake Maye has, but mentally learning those little nuances, knowing exactly what to do in certain situations with this offense, they might not be there, and they're thrown out there a lot earlier than they should. And, the last thing you want to see is Drake Maye going out there against a AFC conference contender in the Bengals and, struggling against the Bengals, especially when you compare him to going up against Joe Burrow. It could be a rough outing for Drake Maye, and not only that, it sends everybody into a shock, and I mean everybody, right? If Drake Maye doesn't play great, not only could his confidence be a little bit rattled, you don't know how he's going to react to that at such an early age, but then the fans also, who have been screaming for Drake Maye to go out there and start, they see a bad result like that, and they're thinking, oh wow, like maybe he wasn't ready, maybe they threw him out there so long, maybe we didn't evaluate this situation as well as we thought. And also, you look at the coaches as well who end up making this decision and thinking that he was ready. They get smacked in the first game, and now they're questioning everything on whether or not they made the right decision or not. So a lot could go wrong, and that's where my sort of bias lies with this. I feel like you have more to lose in this situation than you have to gain, just because the Patriots are just at the beginning of getting this car rolling again, getting it started once again. So it'll be interesting to see, because right now it seems, just based on this statement, that Alex Van Pelt would want to go with Jacoby, but I feel like Jerod Mayo has been a little bit more open and willing to explore the option of naming Drake Maye the starter. So it'd be interesting, just because I'm sure both of them are going to have their intel when the decision is made, but I'm assuming that Jerod Mayo has the final say in this. So if they do disagree and Jerod Mayo still goes with Drake Maye, how does that dynamic work? How does that pan out for them? And not only how does that affect Drake Maye as well going forward? It's something to keep an eye on, certainly. I don't know when exactly they're going to name the starting quarterback. It could be next week after their third and final preseason game, but also it could be in the weeks leading up to the first week of the regular season. They haven't disclosed that yet, but there's a lot riding on this. There's a lot that's going to be micro-analyzed in how Drake Maye plays and Jacoby plays, but ultimately the decision will fall on Jerod Mayo and Alex Van Pelt. So it'll be very fascinating to see how they decipher that and when we get that announcement as well. But for right now, we're just going to continue to speculate and move on to our final topic, just a rankings that I wanted to bring to you guys here on today's episode of the show. With these wide receivers getting together after the Jahan Dotson trade, I thought I'd rank the top 5 best wide receiver trios currently in the NFL. The Eagles are in there, the Chiefs are in there, the Titans, and a couple more will feature on this list. Stay tuned to find out the order and who is the number 1, the best wide receiver trio in the NFL when we return. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just a rankings list here that I wanted to bring up with a lot of wide receiver trios now apparently in the NFL. I wanted to come on here and just quickly rank them for you guys just because it was pretty hard to do this, I'm not going to lie. Not only to get it down to 5, but also to just consider a lot of the honorable mentions that I did want to mention on here before I get into the top 5. And when I made the list, I'm not considering, having two great wide receivers like the Rams have with Puka and Cooper Kupp. But again, no disrespect to Tutu Atwell or Demarcus Robinson. I'm not going to consider them a trio just because they have two really good ones. And also, again, no disrespect to those guys, but just it's not the same as some of these other guys I have on my list. Same thing for the Bengals. T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. Their third one, it could be Iosivas, but not the same category, I believe, in that department. And so I didn't want to include them in this list before any of you guys see this and think, I've lost my mind by not including them. That's sort of the criteria that I wanted to meet on making this rankings. But before we get into the top 5, those honorable mentions that I did want to mention were the 49ers with Ayuk, Debo, and Juwan Jennings. You might think, what are you talking about? That's almost the same thing that you said you weren't going to do. But Juwan Jennings, you look at that performance he had in the Super Bowl and throwing a touchdown pass, having a couple touchdown receptions. I think he's earned that spot now to be in a little bit higher of a category than those other guys that I mentioned. And I am just mentioning them for right now, knowing that Ayuk could move on. But for right now, I threw them in there at least as an honorable mention. And the same goes for the Seattle Seahawks with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Very underrated one. And they are responsible for a lot of the success that the Seattle Seahawks have. I'm really a big fan of Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think he could really blossom into that second best wide receiver on that team if you don't already consider him that already. With Tyler Lockett still there, a veteran presence, still a capable wide receiver, but those two teams I wanted to make sure I shined a little bit of light on before I get into the top 5. And starting off with the 5th team, the Super Bowl winning team, the Kansas City Chiefs, are the 5th best NFL trio on my rankings. I went with the Chiefs just because I like their ceiling with these guys. Not the biggest names, at least yet. You look at Marquise Brown, you don't really think of him too much in his time with the Cardinals, just in terms of success and everything like that. But you look at his time spent with the Ravens, yeah, he might have been a little bit young, but now really in the prime age era of his career, being on the Chiefs right now, I think he's going to do great things for them, considering the situation that the Chiefs had last year with their wide receivers. And then you look at Rashee Rice, a guy that made a name for himself, standing out in that very bland wide receiver room. I think now heading into year 2, he's going to have a bigger role as well. And a guy that I'm really excited about is Xavier Worthy. Everyone will talk about Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison, and Malik Neighbors, but I think Xavier Worthy could sneakily have one of the better seasons as an offensive rookie wide receiver for the Chiefs just because of the situation and it's speed on speed on speed on this offense with these 3 guys. And the reason I have them at number 5 really most of all is that they're just young. 2 out of the 3 of them are very young, and I think more so it has to do with Andy Reid's brilliant, genius offense that these guys fit perfectly into, more so than them being in a position where just pound for pound they are great receivers. They're not there yet. I still think they have a ways to go. I'm not saying they can't get there in terms of Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy, but they are still in the earlier stages of that. So to me, having that speed is game-changing, so I had to put them in at number 5. But then just above them, and I mean just above because the differences that I had between all 5 of these teams was pretty close, but the next team I wanted to put above them is the Tennessee Titans. You look at DeAndre Hopkins, they were able to sign Calvin Ridley and also sign Tyler Boyd, and now forming where the Chiefs were a very young team. This is one of the older more experienced, more seasoned wide receiver trios in the NFL, but still, nonetheless, any less talented or any less capable than a lot of these. The differences that I tried to find in these rankings were pretty small, but you look at DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, I still think are two capable wide receiver ones. And then you look at Tyler Boyd, maybe never or maybe not right now considered a wide receiver one, but he is still capable, only 29 years old, being in an offense that he is very comfortable with Brian Callahan, to still put up 600 to 700 yards, I believe, in terms of offense and how much he's able to contribute to that team, which is great if Calvin Ridley, and it's a big if Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins don't drop off for any sort of reason, if they can still produce 1,000-yard seasons, just at least 1,000 yards, I'll take 900 or anything like that. But if one of those guys drops to 800, high 700s, I think then it becomes a little bit of a problem. But as long as they are putting up 1,000 yards, getting their target shares and helping out Will Levis a lot, I think this team will be very competitive in major part to all three of these guys being on the same offense, in an offense that also is a lot more open, a lot more modern, that I believe all three of them can really excel in 2024. So that's where I have them, just above the Kansas City Chiefs, for that experience, and also getting a little bit older. It doesn't seem like health is any bit of a problem for them at all. So, that's a great thing for the Tennessee Titans as well. But then at number 3, a little bit difficult with the Miami Dolphins to have them here. It was really a battle between 3 and 4, and I'll explain why. It's because the Dolphins, 2 awesome wide receivers, right? Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And not to say that Odell is bad by any means, but there are just more questions, possibly the most questions I had with a third wide receiver in all of these trios that I tried to rank, because it's not so much his ability, but just the fact that getting him out there on the field could be a little bit of a liability when you're talking about him at this stage of his career, because last year he played 14 games, which was great, right? That's pretty healthy for Odell. But before that, he had not played in more than 8 games in any of the previous 3 seasons before last year. And last year, he still put up 565 yards, 35 receptions, and 3 touchdowns, which you might look at as number 3 wide receiver type of numbers, but he, I think, was looked upon with the Ravens as one of their better wide receivers. He was out there a lot more than Rashad Bateman was, obviously getting hurt, and Zay Flowers was still a rookie, so I feel like he was looked upon to do a little bit more, where I just don't see Odell filling that role anymore. So now, when you pair him up with Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, I feel like he's going to do great things. He, I think, could be a difference maker if he stays healthy, contributing. He got 500 yards, nearly 600 last year on the Baltimore Ravens. I think this offense suits him a lot better, being surrounded with the best wide receiver in football from last year, and also Jalen Waddle, a great wide receiver, great young and up-and-coming wide receiver. You surround him with that. I think Odell, again, staying healthy, and that's a big question, can give you 600, 700 yards in 14, 15 games that he plays this upcoming year. But again, that health does scare me a little bit, but I couldn't put the Dolphins, who had the best receiver in football, any lower than 3. I feel like that would discredit it, so I had to put them at number 3, but they aren't number 2, and they aren't number 2 just because I think the Philadelphia Eagles really have a perfect mesh of everything in terms of, health not being an issue, and all their wide receivers, or at least A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, are not, or I should say, are pretty much entering those prime years of their careers. I think Devontae Smith is about 25 years old, and A.J. Brown is 27, 26. So these next 4 to 5 years that they have together are going to be very prosperous if they continue on this trajectory that they have been on. A.J. Brown, arguably a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. There is a lot of them, but I think he has separated himself pretty clearly from the great ones to the elite wide receivers, and he followed up his performance in 2022 with another 1,400-yard receiving yard season for the Philadelphia Eagles, and Devontae Smith not too far behind him. Sharing the ball is a big part of what makes these trios successful, and the Eagles have done a great job of doing that with two of these guys still getting Devontae Smith his 1,000 yards as well. And now you add Jahan Dotson, and we talked about him before. He doesn't have to do too much, honestly, in this offense, and they're already great with AJ and Devontae Smith, but adding a guy like Jahan Dotson, again, a former first-round pick, if he can tap into that potential just a little bit more, I don't think that's asking for a lot. This offense can be even more unstoppable than it already is technically on paper with Saquon and Goddard and Jalen Hurts even in his running ability as well. If Jahan can produce a little bit more, 600, 700 yards, I don't know how you stop this offense, honestly. And that's the trajectory that this team is on, and that's why I have them number 2. But they aren't number 1 because the Houston Texans, to me, have the situation where all 3 of these guys can be number 1 receivers, whereas with the Eagles, Jahan Dotson's not really there yet. He could be, maybe, I don't know, potentially. One day he can be, but he's obviously not there yet. The Miami Dolphins, Odell Beckham Jr., I think he's past being a number 1 wide receiver. The Tennessee Titans, Tyler Boyd, not really there as well. And the Chiefs, a lot of young guys, not considered elite number 1 receivers just yet, where these guys, I think you could really name each one of them a number 1 receiver on a bunch of teams across the NFL. Because you look at, obviously, Stephon Diggs coming over. He has the resume. He's the most accomplished out of the other 2. But Nico really broke out last year, going for over 1,200 yards and, stepping up into that lead receiver role when Tank Dell really went down. A big reason why C.J. Stroud had a lot of success. And, you add him, his breakout year, now heading into year 4, to Tank Dell. We didn't really get to see too much of him. I would have loved to have seen him in the playoffs or anything like that, but you look at the games he was able to play. Through 11 games, he already had 700 yards as a rookie. So if he played the next 6 to 7 games, he could have easily gone over that 1,000-yard mark, and whatever else the stats could have been, it could have been ridiculous to have him with Nico Collins and how that could have affected their playoff push. And now you add a guy like Stephon Diggs, sprinkling in a little bit of that experience and knowledge and just tricks that he has up his sleeves. It's going to work wonders for Nico and Tank. So to have all 3 of them together on this offense, it's going to be scary. And the only thing you do worry about is how you're going to get the ball to each one of these guys on top of Joe Mixon and Dalton Schultz. But the volume share, that could be used for all these teams, right? How is Tyreek, Jalen, and Odell going to split them? How are Tyler, Calvin, and DeAndre going to split them? I don't think that's a valid reason to just use on all 3 of these guys, as I named them all number 1 wide receivers. You could use that excuse for all of these teams, but to me, they have the situation where all 3 of these guys are number 1 wide receivers at this point, and that's why they're being hyped up as much as they are. Not performing to the level that they got to at least last year is going to be looked at as a major failure. And I don't think a lot of people are putting them in the conference championship yet, but I don't think anyone's going to be surprised if they get there with this talent that they have, especially on the offensive side of the ball, but even more so at the wide receiver position. So those are my rankings. When you guys check this video out, let me know what you guys feel and think about how I ranked all of these trios. Did I miss out on somebody? Did I not rank them properly? Leave your guys' honest thoughts in the comments section down below. But that'll wrap it up for today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast and Sports Network channel, to catch more content around the NFL and this show. And lastly, remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more discussions and the biggest headlines around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you for joining me again. I hope you guys all have a great weekend and enjoy the final week of the NFL preseason.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to